just want to welcome Thorsten Rood to this last presentation slot in User Share XL Security. I got to tell you, attendees, you guys are rock stars. You have hung in here all day. It has been a really informative, packed afternoon, and I'm sure that Thorsten has a ton more information for us. So with that, I don't want to eat up any more of his time. I'm going to send it over to you, Thorsten.
Okay, so welcome everybody. I honestly just came in, I would say 5 minutes ago right now, straight from the last customer. So it's my night time. Welcome to all you in the afternoon. Thanks for being with us. And you see in the title, we have the short track edition. Just to explain you about the idea behind the short track, because I literally finished that deck Tuesday, and then I realized the timing is a little like this, saying that I have 20 minutes. Which brings me into a problem. I'm scheduled for 20 minutes. I'll let you go in time. That's the idea behind. But I have two huge things that deal with security, specifically for your on-premises infrastructure, and that is simply undoable in 20 minutes if you are keen on the details. So maybe this becomes the teaser session for today. And if you're interested in much more deep dive, I'm opening the offering for all you guys to have kind of a follow-up webinar that has more time left to do that, because essentially 10 minutes per each of these. So back again to the main question, or the main intention. I care about security. I love security, kind of, but I want to make sure that also the users that consume these things also like the stuff. And this is why I thought we should talk about Azure MFA and Google reCAPTCHA. And the main thing is the thesis for the first round. It's about the MFA when it means NetScaler Unified Gateway. My intention is to bring something to our users that satisfies today's modern needs, how to deal with authentication. And what I specifically mean to say is we talk about touch-based authentication instead of handling with other stuff. And this other stuff, as you typically are aware, I think, is this traditional two-factor key fob thing where you type in digits from something. And what I get frequently as a feedback from my users, that is the most hated protection practice. However, it's a matured thing. There's nothing wrong with that. But in the year 2017 and upwards, I think that is no longer the best answer to provide 2FA. The interesting thing for a majority of at least Citrix clients, I would say, the alternative that comes from the Microsoft is with us automatically as part of the Office 365 Security Suite offering, like saying the E3, the E5, the Mobility and Security Suite offering. All they have Azure MFA as part of the offering, but this is traditionally something that you consume cloud-based from Microsoft. And that has some implications. What is kind of unknown, as far as I've learned, there is a component that you can run on premises. And to run this on premises simplifies the whole game of dealing with two-factor authentication. You have something that you have in your own data center that works in a pretty much similar way as any other security appliance that deals with traditional SMS or two-factor key fob style, so it speaks radius. So there's nothing specifically to deal with, for example, on the NetScaler side. It has, and that's the cool thing about it, it has full self-service capabilities, so you don't have to worry about how to enroll the technology to your users. And of course, it has full app support. So if you assume that the majority of your users have a smartphone of the three major technologies, iOS, Android, and the WinPhone, even if it's still there, you have an app. So you come pretty close to a great usability. And the nice thing is that that software piece leverages the Azure infrastructure for keeping up with the messaging. So that's the thing. And on the NetScaler side, there's pretty much nothing to think about it, I would say, because it comes in the same radius flavor that you have from other offerings, like other SMS-based offerings, for example. It's fully transparent from that perspective. So if you're familiar with configuring NetScaler for these type of things, you are almost good to go. But as I was saying, it integrates nicely in terms of rollout. You need to take care that you actually know what NetScaler Unified Gateway can do for you in that example. And that is easiest described with a picture. So let's go into diagram mode. Diagram mode means we talk about NetScaler Unified Gateway. And as you hopefully already know, it is powered by content switching technology, which allows you to bring different resources under one IP address, eventually under one namespace, where one aspect is just gateway, which brings you storefront integrations and desktop and stuff like that. But you have more. You complement this technology with the on-premises version of Microsoft MFA, which of course needs to reach out to Azure AD for licensing the respective users that are part of your Active Directory. And what comes with that on top is the Authentication Engine. So this is the standard way to integrate that. That's pretty much straightforward. What is also interesting from the technology perspective, as I was saying, you have a good user experience. You need to deal with that user experience in terms of rollout. So there is something that allows you that this smartphone application on the left-hand side can talk to the registration service just to make sure that this app gets coupled to the user identity. And of course, if the user enrolls for all that stuff, he has to authenticate to the self-service user portal to actually enroll that stuff. So the idea is to say you give the user the initial welcome message, and at least for a certain percentage of users, the whole rollout gets into a self-service mode with nothing where you have to worry about. So once they have the token configured, they just authenticate in a traditional way as you already do with other technologies, reaches out to the MFA. It validates the thing back through the Azure infrastructure to notify the smartphone for an additional authentication prompt, and then you're good to go. So this is basically the technology that you deploy on premises. And with that, once the user is in, you have a very strong, very robust offering in terms of two-factor. And as I was saying, it's more like a teaser mode. I want to give you a kind of a taste with that. It will look like this, and that brings us to a quick demo of how that looks like. A few words on the demos that you can differentiate that. The demo behind satisfies a much more rich experience with different authentication methods on top. And so you will see, for example, a unified gateway asking for user and password and eventually a key fob authentication, which brings the option that NetScaler allows you to configure this with N-factor. So in that example, I leave the key fob input field empty, which in the internal processing of NetScaler allows me switching over to a different authentication method. So don't be alarmed that something is different than I was talking previously. It's the same security, so you can choose either between key fob authentication from a different party vendor or the Azure MFA by leaving the field blanks, just to give you an idea how this is working. So the administrative experience is the on-premises edition, which is purely Windows-based software. You create the Active Directory for your users. You tag the users with the languages, how to welcome them, how the initial PIN has to be provided. You enable the different methods in terms of how the authenticator should work. And by doing this, the user automatically receives a welcome email in his inbox. So going to the user side and to the smartphone side by side, you have this welcome message from your MFA infrastructure saying, hey, by the way, welcome, you have been enrolled. This is the method. This was your own SMS number. This is the initial PIN coming from the system. Please change that later. So we first time now log into our unified gateway to enroll for the app. So we go there in the same way as before. We authenticate. So we authenticate using SMS method. So we hit here the prompt. We see the incoming SMS tree on the smartphone, which says, hey, give me the response. So we type that plus the initial PIN that we received by email. And we get into Unified Gateway. Unified Gateway brings me for sure the HDX things and the bookmark to the user portal, which is also on premises, authenticated in that case. So that's the thing here. So again, another authentication, which is also coming in through SMS. And then we are here in our enrollment center, fully protected, two-factor ready. We change our PIN to something that we can remember ourselves if you need that later on. Save that. And then we say, I have these apps, so generate me the activation code. I pre-populate the phone with the Microsoft Authenticator app, which is blank so far. We generate the QR. We go into the app saying we want to add an additional account, which is a business one that brings up the camera. We're doing a snap of the screen. That automatically fetches the registration API, which also runs on premises, and now the account is configured. And with that, you can now go to the authentication method and say, by the way, this is now touch, which is saved. We log off from all the things. So this app is now touch enabled. We come back, log back in. And that's the cool thing here. You just come back to your portal, you type user password as you would typically would do. And just with a touch of your fingerprint on the right-hand side, you have to verify. So first touch from the iOS perspective. Next touch inside the app. You commit that also. And then you're in. No more typing, nothing where the user has to remember the methodology. And that's just it. Purely secure. You can also limit the number of tokens that may be associated to the user. So if you don't want to have the user registering 3 or 4 cell phones, you could say it's just 1, for example. Then you have your one factor that you can easily control and configure and just use. And as I was saying, for a majority of customers that I'm working with today, this comes with them automatically as part of their Office 365 Security Suite licensing entitlement. So it's a very interesting thing to look at. The configuration is pretty much straightforward. Radius, of course, need to a little bit learn about this specific app, but in the end, it's just another user portal that runs on a Windows server at your choice. So that's the idea. What I'm interested in just making 2FA better than it is traditionally today, much more useful, more handy, and less conflicting with today's user needs. But that's not the only thing how to think about how authentication could be done. There's another thing which comes from the Google perspective, and I guess you all know this thing which is called I'm Not a Robot. This is essentially what we talk about. We talk about reCAPTCHA. And the idea of this I'm not a robot is that's coming from a different perspective. It comes from a different assumption. And the assumption is saying two-factor is pretty good. That's something I would everybody recommend going forward. But in the end, you may have a user audience where just this strong two-factor strategy cannot be applied by any chance. And if that is, you have this trade-off between security and enforceability. And in the end, to make such a scenario more secure, the standard answer is thinking about rate filtering. Rate filtering means you need to find a way that not a robot style or an automatic framework can try logins in an endless manner and at a huge frequency. And that's just the thing. And the question is, how do you rate limit a login? If even 10 logins per second could be too much, even 5 logins per second could be too much. So essentially what Google comes up with reCAPTCHA is saying they provide you something that is completely bot resistant because it's using browser-based intelligence that an automation engine simply cannot bypass that easily. And it allows you to bring that as an authentication factor into anything that talks web services authentication. So you can keep an existing one-factor authentication method and strategy, if you will. It will not be perfectly secure, but it will at least be very, very robust against brute force attacks from the outside. So in the end, what you need to make sure, you need to register with Google. It is more or less free. Of course, there's always a trade-off when something comes from Google for free, but in the end, there's no fee that you have to provide them with on a yearly or monthly basis. And of course, the other thing, you need to support web login technology. And web login means the client technology that leverages the authentication framework has to deal with JavaScript and web forms, which essentially means, looking at the Citrix world, native receiver is not compatible so far. The N-factor technology on NetScaler that is required to get this running is not there in the native receivers right now. But as of speaking, that is something that is a moving target. But as of today, it's received for web and any other reverse proxy technology. So this is kind of a limitation, of course. But this is something that you just need to take care of. And of course, from a technology perspective, N-factor is required because of the way how you display the login form, because this I'm not a robot thing is something that has to be rendered. The interesting thing, which is pretty much unknown, it is completely ready on NetScaler on any shipping 11 version. The only thing that is not pre-populated for a very obvious reason is the public site key that is required to get the thing going. So it comes with an empty JavaScript variable. And just to make sure that we have the common understanding, you can, of course, touch the files on NetScaler, which is kind of the recommendation today. But the downside of that is on each firmware upgrade, of course, NetScaler replaces the whole web tier on the box, which includes the login UI. And so this blanks out this variable again. The good news also is you can use a standard rewrite action on NetScaler to dynamically do that. So that will also sustain a NetScaler upgrade. There's something in the appendix later how to do that. So nothing for sure, but just to keep in mind how to deal with in reality if you're doing firmware upgrades, as the last one recently that happened last week because of a security issue. You should be aware of how to get that running in production. So again, speaking is easy. I think a diagram keeps that much more clear and simple. It's pretty much similar to the previous design. We have XenDesktop as an example for HDX integration. I'm using the standard example of Outlook Web App because that's the most mature web candidate that comes with enterprise business so far as I'm aware of. And we want to project that scenario with Google reCAPTCHA. So the idea is here that the user comes in, we pre-register everything with our account so that the NetScaler is pre-configured to deliver the right form. So when the user clicks in, the form reaches out with the public key to Google for rendering something dynamically. So that comes in browser verification, the IP reputation, some analysis things. If that is a fresh browser, you have to click through these phenomenal pictures and stuff like that. And once this is done, you have your personal response code that you can send to NetScaler, which is part of the authentication. So it's a hidden field that the user doesn't have to type, but it's essentially part of the login sequence. On the NetScaler end, you reach out back to Google with your private key to verify if that matches the expectation. And once this is done, your LDAP authentication, which is the thing that user types interactively, becomes the secondary factor. So this is essentially a great option to rate limit even those scenarios where you cannot afford or you have limits in terms of complexity for essentially deploying a true two-factor authentication. And it's the good thing is that this CAPTCHA thing has evolved over the time so that a known browser, for example, doesn't have to undergo the authentication in detail each and every time because the cookie is pre-stored and preserved persistently in that system. So it's not that nagging as it looks like, but of course it has kind of interaction, which is the idea behind of CAPTCHA, right? So again, speaking is easy, showing is much more easy. So we have the demo here as well. This is the shortcut demo that doesn't showcase a unified gateway incomplete. It just shows that you have a success authentication method because that's just the thing that is important to showcase. So we go here into our gateway. It pre-populates everything in terms of CAPTCHA. You type in username and password, but you have to fill and undergo the Google sequence. So we click there in, answer the standard pictures because that was a blank browser which has no cookies stored so far. We say next. As it's the first browser ever, we need to have the next sequence. That's something you can configure in Google, how naggy that essentially is. Say verify, you have the computed code inside hidden in the form, say log on, NetScaler validates all that stuff and says welcome, you're in. So there is no more HDX now in the background, but you see it's a personalized session that welcomes just me for simplification purposes. That's the thing I want to leave you with. And with that, I would say this is the reason why I gave it the title Better Authentication Made Easy, because these are the two things that are relatively easy to achieve. The Google one is very interesting on a mass-scale perspective without changing anything to your authentication needs, as long as you don't have to deal with native receivers all over the place. The Azure thing, of course, requires a certain licensing and audience to really lift off, but I think from a touching perspective, that is the ultimate modern way to do two-factor today. And the very good news is NetScaler supports them all. And my countdown says we are going in the last 30 seconds or so, and I want to stay here the rest of the day as promised. So the thing is, as that was just kind of a teaser, is that good enough? Just to get an idea what's possible, do we want to have a deep dive on that? For those coming from Europe, November 17th is a chance for you to get that in a different flavor in similar way. For international guests, I'm open for any other follow-up. So tweet about that, respond in the survey if you like that thing. And with that, I want to give you back the rest of the day and saying thank you for that.
Thank you, Thorsten. I would say that we definitely want you back for another presentation on a deeper dive. Absolutely. So I will connect with you offline to to make sure we can make that happen. All right, and that brings us to the end of our afternoon. Thank you guys so much for hanging in there. We have a very short, anonymous, very quick survey for you guys to fill out. This was our first expanded webinar event. I think it was a great success. I think we had a lot of great information and a lot of great members of the CUGC community come forward to speak. So I appreciate everyone who was here, whether you were presenting or just listening. I think it was a really great afternoon. Make sure you guys go out to mycugc.org. We have all kinds of stuff for you out there. If you haven't been there before, we have local groups all around the world. Plug in, find your group, find a local meeting, find out about more webinars. We have a lot of blog content for you, forum threads, tons of stuff. And I know that many of you know that there will be an Amazon Echo show given away. The winner of that will be announced on Twitter, so be sure to follow us on Twitter at mycugc. And with that, I will return all of you to the rest of your day. Thank you so much. You all will get a link to the recording and to all the resources from today's presentations. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day, evening, afternoon. Bye-bye.